Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday morning. It's so nice to see so many of you joining, and to thank you again for all of the messages and comments over the past few weeks. I think one of the biggest themes of the questions and comments I've been receiving has been, what do we do from here? Over the course of the past 5 months or 6 months or so, we have been actively talking about the decision that our representative and our congressmen and women across the country are going to have to make with the One Big Beautiful Bill, HR R1, and whether they would, where they would fall. It was a significant decision, but and the vote did not go as we would like, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of that on us and on New York moving forward. But I'm here to share this is only the beginning. From implementation to electing a new Congress next year, there's so much more that we have left to do, and so much more that we need to discuss and work towards. The arc of progress is not straight or linear, and setbacks occur, and this is one of them. And so now, if anything, it's time to get to work. And one of the people I'm going to be talking with today, John Sullivan, it's so wonderful to have him here, is going to share a little bit more about how he sees us getting to work in the coming years. And I'm so thankful that he's with us. Again, now more than ever, I think it's just incredibly important for all of us to know our messengers, who they are, what expertise they bring, how they've earned that expertise, which is more than a credential, and what they represent. For those I haven't met, hi, I'm Kevin McAvey. I'm a husband, father, live in Bedford, New York, lifelong New Yorker, state health policy consultant. I work with states across the country. Red and blue, I don't really care, because everyone really wants their systems to work better. And I'm a good government advocate, something I think we very much need right now. The purpose of these sessions is to make sure that we are all getting better equipped to have these complex policy conversations, really understand the issues that we're collectively facing across NY-17, Rockland, Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess counties, and equip us with the information we need to pick our next representative to represent our issues and our concerns. So we'll discuss the issues, we'll foster community, we'll introduce the candidates, and we've been doing that really well. And I really, again, I really appreciate all of the comments. You're tuning in, you're sharing these posts and these videos. It's been amazing. A number of the candidates have reported upticks in fundraising after this, a request for individual speaking opportunities, and I want to thank my wife for allowing me to do these things as Bedlam and ultimately unfolds on the home front. But I think these conversations are really important to make sure that we get to know our candidates, and then ultimately next year we have a people's primary. I very much believe, and I've made this widely known, over the course of 2025, every person that enters the race for the Democratic nomination for NY-17 should have the opportunity to work their campaign and show what they can do and show what they believe in. I would strongly advocate and against any press to winnow the field before the end of the year by anyone. This really should be a decision that comes from the district, from residents who get to understand and know our candidates, and then ultimately get to indicate which ones they'd like to ultimately choose between in a primary. And I very much look forward to continuing to advocate for that on your behalf in the months to come. A couple of pieces of news, because it's been a week and a half since we've had the opportunity to chat together. I mentioned before, we've interviewed 8 different candidates so far. This past week, Axios reported that former Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney is mulling a political comeback against Mike Lawler. He's appalled by Mr. Lawler's vote on the reconciliation bill. I invite him to purchase the t-shirts we'll have on sale. I think that many people in our district, and particularly those who are watching these live streams, share that sentiment. There's no timeline. I've heard fall where he's going to make a decision, and some conflicting reports about how serious he is about making that decision. But one note that I just want to put out there from the follow-up article in Politico, because this was a quote, and this is no slight to Mr. Maloney, but it is something that I think I've heard on at least 3 or 4 occasions since the news came out in different words. This quote from Shannon Powell. My sense is that this isn't something that anybody from the community is crying out for. I mean, not once have I heard anybody say, oh my God, if we could only get Sean Patrick Maloney to run again. And again, with no disrespect to the congressman, we have a field of tremendous candidates here who've been working in and serving the district. And I look forward to interviewing and making sure that all of you get to know those candidates, including John Sullivan, who's with us today. And I also want to I mentioned this at the end of our last stream. I am incredibly excited and feel very privileged to be able to not only interview the candidates for this first go round, but August, if you're wondering what your plans are, some of you are thinking about vacations and beaches, but live streams travel everywhere, and we are going to get to interview all of the candidates again. Peter Chadsky, Kate Conley, Beth Davidson, Mike Sachs, Effie Phillips Staley, John Sullivan, Jeremy Saland, Jessica Reinman, all will return. I have not scared them off yet. And this time, each of them is going to bring an issue that they've heard as of great importance to you as they've been meeting with you across the district. And it'll be up to me to get smart enough to have an informed conversation with them about those issues. And how Representative Lawler is not representing our concerns in Congress in each of those discrete areas. I'll be posting this flyer online, and it'll be circulating through various committees across the district over the coming weeks. It's very exciting, and I hope you'll tune in. I would be very remiss not to mention another article that came out this week, and I just want to call out David Wilson for the tremendous reporting in Low HUD. Why did a Lawler aide's name pop up in opposition's chat group urging town hall disorder? Last week, news came out that a group called Fight Lawler, it's a small informal advocacy group, as I know it, of people who are chatting about how they are going to productively push back against Mr. Lawler's decisions. They had a private chat going on Signal, which has been made famous by our defense secretary. And one of the individuals who joined this Signal group under a potential alias came up on one of these individuals' phones from their contact list as Ms. Erin Crawley, the deputy district manager for Representative Lawler. During the town hall in Somers, where I actually believe I met Ms. Crowley, and she asked me twice in a rather patronizing way whether I've understood all of the rules that have been outlined on an outsized poster board outside of the actual town hall itself. She was encouraging folks to be disruptive under this alias on this Signal chat. What's most telling to me about this is the lack of transparency and response or accountability. This quote from the article, Mr. Lawler's director of communications did not respond to 2 emails and a phone message seeking comment over the past 3 weeks. Crowley has not responded to 3 email requests for comments since first contacted on the issue on May 20th. She walked away from this writer on June 16th when asked about the Signal group following a meeting on Putnam County's Legislative Committee in Carmel. She did so again on July 1st as she was escorted by a Putnam County deputy sheriff to a legislative meeting. This is tremendously concerning. And to me, violates house ethic rules for staffers, and potentially even the congressman by his lack of being willing to publicly address this concern and weigh in on its tremendous, scary implications. This is a congressman who's gone on national news decrying that the protesters on these meetings are paid protesters when his own staff potentially here have been inciting raucous behavior. Finally, before we bring John up, I do want to take a moment, given the past few months, about on our discussions about the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I continue to call it that, mostly because it just underlines for me how unserious the policymakers were who designed this bill. I wanted to talk through 3 steps that I really do believe are important for us to move forward and learn from this experience. A little bit of a post-mortem. What worked, what didn't. What worked? Broad multi-stakeholder advocacy. It worked to an extent. It was amazing to see how many of you as consumers, as patients, stood up on behalf of what you believed was right and the right vote for us as district residents in this bill, and you standing up on behalf of many family members, neighbors, community members. That you know. Hospitals were in it with us. Payers were in it with us. Local officials were. I don't think that there were very many folks on the opposite side of this bill really advocating for it, and that in and of itself really showed the broad-reaching implications of this bill and unity in opposing it. Rallies and social media engagement. I have never seen a community get built so quickly, and it was a real rallying cry. And the important thing is really making sure that we don't lose those connections moving forward. A few observations on my end of what didn't necessarily work. Appealing to representatives to represent local interests. And I don't mean that in a flip way. Historically, over the past few decades, representatives have felt a personal responsibility, as Anthony Wright, CEO or Executive Director of Families USA, mentioned on one of our live streams 3-4 weeks ago, to bring home the bacon. Really, like for me, it's like protecting your state. I understand what the national party line is, but listen, this bill is going to disproportionately hurt my state in New York, and I'm not going to vote for something that does so. I appreciate Mr. Lawler's press to raise the cap on the SALT tax exemption. I will remind everyone that that's a knife put in New York's back by the previous Trump administration and Republican Congress. So thank you for taking the knife halfway out. But I actually would prefer if the bill didn't disproportionately hurt New York and really reflected our values. Data and facts this time, I think they were a real rallying cry for us, and but at the end of the day, they didn't sell opposition to the bill. Issues at play in this bill as part of this postmortem, the role of the federal government in resolving public concerns. And I'm going to talk about these a little bit more in our next cast, but healthcare access and affordability, food security, clean energy, all of these. There's a significant debate about the federal role in advancing these causes. I believe the federal government can and should play a role in advocating for these public goods, providing a minimum level of minimum standard for everyone in our country to, when they get sick, have access to a doctor. When they're hungry, have access to food. And I think it's the role of the federal government to think about our country's needs, not only today, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the world that our kids are going to be inheriting. And the divestiture of clean energy subsidies was tremendous. There was tremendous and back and forth and push for quote unquote individual responsibility and personal accountability in this bill. Program sustainability was a phrase that came up a lot. Of course, the villainization of immigrants and other populations, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, was prominent in conversations about this bill, as were the role of taxation and economic growth. Republicans have historically always believed that lower tax rates don't just result in economic growth, but result in economic growth that no economist or very few accredited and credentialed economists would cite as realistic expectations. Like one thing, even though it came up a lot, this bill does not reduce the deficit. In fact, it increases the federal deficit by 3.4 trillion if this versus what would have happened had this bill not been passed. It provides $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, including 2/3 to the wealthiest. It takes away around $300 billion from our food assistance programs, affecting over 300,000 people in New York. It takes away about Medicaid from up to 11.8 million people nationwide, takes $1 trillion out of this program, which will affect us all as our healthcare providers lose those funds and have to likely cut services. We've already started hearing that in New York. In New York specifically, 1.5 million New Yorkers could lose access to healthcare, $13.5 billion it could cost both the state and our healthcare system over the course of the next, annually over the course of the next 10 years. Further, ACA premiums could increase 35%. Education could be limited, particularly for some of our most lowest income individuals. Over 270,000, around 270,000 New Yorkers could have their Pell Grants cut or eliminated. And then, of course, the clean energy divestiture, $488 billion in cuts for energy incentives for clean energy investments across the country. This in New York, per the Energy Innovation Policy and Technology nonprofit, a nonpartisan research institution, assessed that it could potentially increase energy costs in New York by up to $300 per year. So thank you, Mr. Lawler, for helping to take the knife halfway out for the SALT deduction. But I think that there's a lot in here that we still disagree with and would have encouraged you to vote against. Step 3, ensure that we have representation that reflects our values. The 2026 congressional election process is underway, and I would encourage each of you to participate. And with that, I would love to introduce our guest today, John Sullivan. John Sullivan is a former FBI intelligence analyst and section chief with nearly 17 years of experience working to combat security threats at home and abroad. He was raised in a working class family. John was the first in his family to earn a 4-year degree. In the FBI, John worked his way into leadership positions, serving as presidents of both parties and taking on foreign adversaries and terrorists in the Middle East, drug cartels, human traffickers at our southern border, both at home and abroad. He was a leader of teams to help protect all of us. He was instrumental in investigating the January 6th insurrectionists. John left the FBI just in April, and we'll talk a little bit about that, as one of the most senior gay officials in the Bureau. And I am so thrilled to have him here today and for us to have the opportunity to chat and introduce him to you all. Hi, John.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I have to say that list of the knife coming halfway out is a little bit sad to see how many more knives were put in. And I just want to thank you for using your platform and your voice to help educate all of us in New York 17 and beyond, because it's really important that people understand the impact. So I just want to thank you for what you're doing and taking time out of your schedule, as we are all trying to raise the next generation.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for coming on. I think we're all one lesson I'm trying to learn over the course of the year is all of us have a role to play, and it's not the same role and it's different roles, but no matter what, figure out what your role is and participate in the process.
Yeah,
your voice
absolutely.
matters. And your voice matters, John, especially. I mean, like, you decide before I want to get to the moment when you said, like, I need to make this commitment. I'm going to run. But like, could you back me up a little bit, like, and actually just kind of introduce yourself and a little bit of your journey, like, where did you start and where have you come from?
Yeah, well, you did a great job of kind of getting across some of the key points in my bio, so I'll try not to repeat many of those things. But when I graduated college, I am the first person in my family to get a 4-year degree, but college was also made possible in a large part because of student loans. And so I wanted to ensure that I didn't have too many student loans that I was mounted with when I left. So I actually accelerated a master's program. And so when I graduated, it was 8 a.m., get the bachelor's degree, and then run across the quad with my family for 8:30 to get the master's degree. And then I realized I was exhausted. Uh, but got a master's degree in international affairs, international relations, and was trying to figure out, like everyone else, when you graduate college, what you want to do, and found myself in a nonprofit actually for veterinarians, working in advocacy and helping lead their internship and fellowship program. Didn't know a
Mhm.
lot about veterinarian issues,
Yeah.
but do now. We could talk in depth at some point about them.
Good.
Um,
Maybe that'll be your issue.
yeah, maybe. I might do a disservice at this
Yeah.
point. It's been 17 years, but uh, I wanted to find a way, though, after being in that position for a little bit, to give back, because
Mhm.
there so many opportunities were given to me in this country. And growing up the son of a working class family and parents who worked, my mom worked more than one job just to help my brother and I have a better life. And so had a very close friend who had started working at the FBI and was telling me how impactful she thought it was and how interesting the work was. So, like everyone, I went online to USA Jobs, found an
Mhm.
FBI job, and sometimes USA Jobs can be a black hole for
Mhm.
resumes, but this job had a very limited job description, and I was actually surprised to start moving through the process. And it took about a year to go through the background investigation and the intensive hiring process, and started in the FBI in DC in surveillance. So I
Mhm.
went from wearing a suit every day to flip flops and t-shirts, following bad guys around on the street.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then did that for a couple years, and your life is a little bit dependent upon those you follow.
Yeah.
And wanted a little bit more stability and move into a different role. So became an analyst and actually moved here to the New York office. Was
Mhm.
working out of 26 Federal Plaza downtown, as well
Mhm.
as supervising teams when I became a leader up here in Westchester, in the Westchester office. Used to be at by Bloomingdale's, and now I
Mhm.
think has been moved to Portchester.
Mhm.
And after being in the FBI in that role for about 6 years, I was selected to go overseas with the FBI as the senior intelligence representative to Israel, working closely with the Israeli authorities there. My husband and I picked up and went to Israel, having never visited,
Yeah.
and moved there for 3 years. And it was really a life changing experience working on counterterrorism issues, primarily focusing on Hamas and
Mhm.
Hezbollah. Having been in the tunnels now outside of Gaza and having had the Iron Dome intercept a missile above my head, I understood the key existential threat that is posed to Israel by those who wish to do it harm. And at the same time, also had the opportunity to be the one of the senior liaisons with the Palestinian Authority as well. So, sometimes it's a little bit of a news story, but
Yeah.
there is a lot of cooperation there in the region and working closely with other nations as well. And the FBI being a domestic organization, I didn't think I'd ever go overseas as a
Yeah.
result of that work. But the FBI has a responsibility to protect Americans wherever they are,
Mhm.
including overseas. And so in Israel, it's important to note a large percentage, almost 25% of the population, are actually dual US citizens. And so when people are visiting, it's obviously a high tourist area as well. The
Mhm.
FBI has responsibility for all American citizens overseas who could potentially come under harm's way. And then when the time was up, it was a 3-year tour of duty. I was selected to come back and thought we would be back here, back where we were with family. And the FBI said, nope, we need you to go to Washington and you're going to take on the criminal program. Something I
No
had not
rest.
yeah, something I had not worked before. So, primarily working transnational organized crime, leading a team there, looking at the southern border. Fentanyl, before we even
Mhm.
knew how to spell it or what it really was under
Mhm.
my team's purview. Looking at cartels in the southern border, and then became the assistant section chief, which is the deputy over what we would call murder and mayhem. I
Mhm.
have it on a plaque over here, but it's essentially the violent crime in the United States, all transnational organized crime, including
Mhm.
oligarchs
Mhm.
that are
Mhm.
in the East, and then uh, the National Gang Intelligence Center, so MS-13, Tren de Aragua, TDA,
Yeah.
and other groups, Sinaloa as well. And so those were all under my purview, and worked in that role for a couple of years, and then was selected by Chris Wray
Mhm.
in 2023 to become a senior executive in the FBI. The organization has about 38,000 employees, about 200 and change or so senior executives. And I had the responsibility for all of our advanced training that took place in the FBI, including how to identify bad guys and how to identify those who would work with us to help make the country safe. And so that kind of leads me to your
Yeah.
first part of the question of what made me decide to leave. One of the things that I did when I was in the criminal team, right after January 6th, shortly after the 7th, 8th, 9th,
Mhm.
was it was a criminal matter at that moment. And my team, I helped lead part of the team that was identifying those who had breached the Capitol and who had tried to stop the, carrying through with democracy. And well, that was very popular at the time, and then when we had a president come in on January 20th who swore the same oath that I swore 17 years ago, and then that evening released all of those insurrectionists back into our communities. People on my team, I won't go into too much
Mhm.
detail, but were actually being threatened by those who were pardoned because they were able to identify who had worked on those cases. And in the FBI as a whole, a lot of people worked on those cases and were scared about their future and their security and their safety in their job because we had been essentially messaged through the removal of some of our senior executives that following the laws and the evidence before was no longer an acceptable reasoning, and this president did not see that those investigations were acceptable. So added to an enemies list, if you will,
Mhm.
of several thousand people, but being one of the senior executives, probably high up on that list. I took a cautious approach to after the election, saying, we'll see. I worked under Trump 1.0.
Mhm.
Um, Trump 2.0 is a complete and utter different
Mhm.
being, and people who are highly unqualified for the roles, including Cash Patel, and even
Mhm.
as recently as the news yesterday of Dan Bongino thinking about
Mhm.
leaving because the job's too hard.
Mhm.
Um, really put a strain on me going to work every day, trying to keep the several hundred people that worked with me and for me motivated because they were so scared every day. And then I was on the receiving end of a Doge email saying, "Hey, that the
Was this
couple
the
million."
5 bullets or like
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, well, even more so.
Yeah.
I I wasn't filling out that email,
Yeah.
but I got an email from them saying, "We know that your budget's a few $1,000,000. You do all this
Mhm.
important work, so you say. We think it's fraud, waste, and abuse, and so it's time to give us that money." And I looked around and said, "Well, we're not gonna do that. We're the
Mhm.
FBI," and
Mhm.
saw some of the senior leaders of the FBI kind of scrambling, being like, "How do we answer this? What do we do? We
Yeah.
wanna make sure we get the spotlight off." And my thing was like, "No, we're the FBI. We're not going to respond to something like this. We know
Mhm.
the work we do is important." And truly that evening came home and said to my husband, "I think I've got to leave. I think I've
Mhm.
got to speak out because all those in the higher echelon who were removed from the government
Mhm.
were nowhere to be found." I thought some of those most senior executives would be on television advocating for those of us still in the building. And seeing that Mike Lawler, was the biggest recipient of Elon Musk's money
Mhm.
in the last election, almost $2 million, and brags about it. It was one of those opportunities where my husband and I talked and saying, you know what, it's time to go back where family and friends are, where we'd always want to be, and see what we can do to stand up and fight back. But I will say in November, even January, running for Congress was not on the bingo card. My plan had to be to continue my career and doing everything possible to protect the American people. But now this is really just a continuation of that mission in a lot of ways.
Where are those voices, and what's keeping them off the media actually kind of talking about these issues?
I think that, they're there probably a little bit more quiet.
Mhm.
Folks are trying to find positions and jobs and want to protect their families and their own safety.
Mhm.
I will say, being an outspoken critic of the current administration, running for office, putting myself out there, the underbelly of
Yeah.
MAGA has really activated
Mhm.
and come after both me and my family
Mhm.
specifically. And it's a scary thing. You shouldn't have to worry about your family or your own personal safety when it
Yeah.
comes to trying to bring a better future to the country and for our kids, right? And
Mhm.
so that has been, I think, probably one of the leading reasons why folks aren't speaking out, is because they know the backlash. And it's a tough and somewhat lonely place. That's why it's great to talk to some of my other candidates that are in the race, because we at least understand that perspective uniquely by being the one who's has their name on the signs.
Yeah. And for a number of elections, and I remember even like Bush 1 to Bush, like the George W. and his reelection campaign.
Yeah.
I remember a number of people kind of talking about how everything is at stake. And I feel like there have been kind of key issues and values at stake in all of these elections. This election feels different.
Yeah.
And I've never quite felt fearful or the fact or seen people I respect who have power and authority feel fearful for
Hmm.
themselves and those
Hmm.
who depend upon them.
Right.
And does that like is are you starting to feel like this is different too? And is that what kind of also kind of drove you into the race?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, if you look back to 2024 in the presidential election, we were warned consistently about the threat to democracy and institutions, and many of
Mhm.
those threats, I think, at the time for most of the American people, seemed kind of a little bit more theoretical,
Mhm.
because folks were going about their lives and just trying to make ends meet. And now we're seeing what happens when those things actually are put into place. I think, to your point, my husband was working at USAID. It was a position he got while we were in Israel as a contractor, and then was hired by USAID here in the United States, working on vetting for the Middle
Mhm.
East to make sure terrorists didn't get our goods and services.
Yeah.
His job's gone.
Yeah.
10,000 people.
Mhm.
And how does that make us more secure? It doesn't. China's filling those gaps.
Yes.
And they're also asking for things in return from those nations, whether
Mhm.
it be minerals or infrastructure. You look at Department of Education, you look at the FBI being so politicized. It was in Trump 1.0, but now you're seeing it where they're actually removing people because of, I think there was a New York Times story just recently, as of yesterday or the day before, talking about polygraphs are being given to those who are in the levels I was serving in, saying, "Are you loyal?" That is not how we keep America safe. We have to be willing to talk about the things that are important to keeping the country safe, whether or not it pleases the folks in power. And so I think this election is so important, primarily because the second half of the Trump administration, when there is no reelection on the horizon, and he realizes his time is running out, we need to be there as a check and balance in the House, and ideally in the House and the Senate. I think that if we do not have that check, we are relying on the next 3.5 years for the courts to actually keep our democracy and our country together. And what I've seen from the courts, even so far, is some of the Supreme Court quick decisions where they, at least say, we're not going to keep this appeal on hold. You can go forward and remove people from the country. Um, it's concerning because it really undermines a lot of the key rights that we have as Americans. If you can deport anyone, regardless of their citizenship status, what's stopping you and I from being deported? And so I think that we have to have representatives in Congress who will stand up and say no. And that's what I've done my entire career. It's been fighting back for the American people to protect them. And I think that we need a Congress who does that, because we cannot just leave it to the courts, because the courts are individual humans who come under the same sort of threats. And obviously, as we saw with some judges, they're not scared about going after judges in the courts as well.
No. And they have been extraordinarily effective. As you mentioned before, unlike with Trump one, where I do think it was a little bit of a surprise for
Yes.
everybody, like, oh, we
Hmm.
got this, and now let's
Hmm.
figure out what to do.
Yeah.
The administration came in this time with a plan,
Yeah. Project.
and they did flood the zone, and there's only so much capacity as people to really understand and respond to issues that are before us and that are made available to us.
Right.
And one of the things that I think has already, just like in a sinful way, kind of been forgotten is something that you mentioned with the defunding of USAID. This wasn't, I mean, like every program in the government, every program in the federal government, the state government, I would actually say every program in the private sector too. I
Hmm.
mean, there are ones that work effectively, there are ones
Yep.
don't, and like the evolution of these programs is hopefully to weed out the ones that don't.
Right.
What happened with USAID and what's happening so often is the cherry picking of examples to then discredit entire
Right.
enterprises.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit? I know this wasn't on, like, we weren't planning on talking about USAID, but like
Yeah.
the value of this, because I think from an international perspective,
Yeah.
it allowed us soft influence around the globe that's
Yeah.
of tremendous importance.
Yeah, that soft power that you mentioned,
Hmm.
it's really hard to quantify in a way for folks to understand. But when you look across the globe, we have friends, and that friend scale varies, right?
Hmm.
And when the United States can invest some money overseas and skill and foreign service officers and personnel to help build a water treatment facility so an entire town can now have access to clean water, when they can build a school or offer broadband to a village that didn't have it before. That engenders such goodwill to the United States because we don't do it in return for anything when we're
Hmm.
doing it. Now, there are times that we say to that country, hey, we would really like if you would be able to support us in this effort, whatever it may be, if it's something related to national security or law enforcement. We often get a yes because they know the United States has been there as a good partner and friend.
Hmm.
And when we start removing 60, 70 years of that cooperation and just ripping it out because we have a new guy in the White House for 4 years, that is damage that cannot be undone in 3 years or even 4 or 5. It's going to take a generation
Hmm.
to show people that the United States stands by its word. We left projects unfinished. We brought people home. We have emptied buildings. And we've left these countries now trying to figure out, how do I finish or build the projects that my people need? And they're looking to other powers, in particular China, who's really good at this and
Hmm.
exploiting that weakness and saying, okay, you needed a water treatment facility. We have the technology. We can do that. How much did the United States offer in funding? $5 million? Sure, we'll do that. We also need your rare earth minerals, though, in return.
Hmm.
We didn't do that part.
Yeah.
We were actually a friend. And
But
the
you know who
problem.
also needs rare or earth minerals, and that's how critical it is for a long-term national security?
Absolutely, absolutely, from chips and everything else. And so
Hmm.
when you look at the cost of USAID, it is 18, I think, dollars per person per year. That's
Hmm.
it. And it gets us so much security around the world and safety. And so it's wild to me that an agency that really does good, and there, look, I will be the first one to say, having been in the government for as long as I was, there is fat and opportunity to trim and
Hmm.
cut. You do it with a scalpel, not with a
Hmm.
chainsaw,
Hmm.
and you do it in a way that you identify ways to not break the programs that are working. And that's what's so disheartening about what Mike Lawler's votes have been recently and Donald Trump. I don't understand the point of becoming a member of Congress and representing a community when your whole goal is to rip things down. When have we ever been in American history where the goal of the government is to make life harder and to break the things that work? It is absolutely bizarre to me. And that's why I think this election matters so much.
I completely agree. And I want to also hear about like some of the other issues that you're hearing as you're traveling around the district. But I do want to point out just one like dark irony that sticks with me about the USAID cuts. It was cut under this kind of the guise of like, we need to bring these dollars home
Hmm.
to help people here.
Hmm.
And then as like months after that, that program was cut, when Republicans, including Mike Lawler, had the opportunity to bring those dollars home to make sure that people had access to affordable like health care,
Hmm.
and make sure that they have access to food for low-income individuals who cannot otherwise procure it, to make sure that they had access to Pell Grants to support higher education. They
Right.
voted against it. And
Yeah.
so again, like, there's this disingenuous nature of how these cuts are being messaged.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just sound bites. I mean, he voted for a special tax exemption for those who own private jets.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have one, but I don't.
I
And
do not have a private jet.
so the idea that that's where his concerns lie, is really sad. And, many of these bills, if the tax cuts in particular, they could solve so many problems for
Yeah,
working families, whether it be making sure kids aren't going to school hungry and
yeah,
trying to learn and sliding all of us backwards when they can't learn.
yeah.
It is just the lack of humanity that we're seeing in this legislation. And no matter what we say to Mike Lawler, how much we beg, have been outside of his office protesting,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter to him because he thinks he's in a safe spot.
Hmm.
And that's our job, to make sure he
Yeah.
knows he's not in a safe spot and he can experience what unemployment looks like right now.
Yeah, and I think we can't accountability starts after these votes and these decisions are made, and
Absolutely.
we have to, it's on all of us to really raise those stories about how this is now going to affect hospitals, how it's already affecting
Right.
nonprofits, how it's going to affect people
Yeah.
in our district. And that's what we're going to do over the course of the
Yeah.
next year. But
Yeah.
as you're traveling and actually talking to people around the district, what are you hearing? Like, what other issues are of great
Mhm.
concern to them?
Yeah, I put a lot of miles on the car in the last 2 months or so, whether it's, traveling all around Westchester and
Yeah.
being at different, anniversaries like in Chappaqua celebrating, or being in East Fishkill, or even Cold Spring the other night, and talking to folks. And what's interesting is there's really two things.
Hmm.
Obviously, number one is affordability, and everyone's worried about making ends meet, particularly as they start to understand the big beautiful bill. I
Hmm.
do think we should call it that at times, because we all understand what beauty is, and this is not beautiful, and they should own it.
I
um,
I keep picturing, just by the way, remember President Bush had that big mission accomplished sign
oh
behind him?
yeah, uh-huh.
I want to hold the big beautiful bill so I can use it when
Oh,
these
you
things
should.
start coming to, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Uh, and so as people start to understand the cuts and the raising of prices, whether it be things you mentioned in the opening,
Hmm.
to even Con Ed wanting to increase already
Hmm.
the cost of electricity, and then adding more to that,
Hmm.
the cost of healthcare. It just goes on and on and on. And so affordability is so key. We're seeing the inflation situation not continue to come down as we were hoping, and then we're blowing up the deficit.
Hmm.
And then the other thing, truly, Kevin, is the chaos. People are just exhausted. We are having a hyped up version of 1.0, where we would wake up every time and see what was the new Twitter message of
Hmm.
the late. Just today, he put out a tweet saying that 30% tariffs on Europe and Mexico. Who is that going to hurt? It's
Hmm.
going to hurt working families and those of us who are literally just seeing more and more money go out of our paycheck.
Hmm.
This generation is one, even us, where the idea of home ownership, or the
Hmm.
ability to have the
Hmm.
life that our parents had in
Hmm.
their 30s and
Hmm.
40s, is not as achievable. And this administration is doing everything possible, with Mike Lawler's help, to make it even further out of reach. And so when I talk to folks, and it's really consistent across the community, from living rooms to coffee shops where I go and sit with folks, it's really the affordability. They're scared about the current situation and then what's coming down the pike. Because I think what's really important to mention about the big, beautiful bill is that a lot of the benefits come online right now.
Hmm.
But a lot of the cuts, a lot of the hard pieces of this legislation,
Hmm.
are politically smart and are coming on board in December of 2026,
Hmm.
after the midterms.
Hmm.
They're unwilling to run on it because they know how bad it is. And we're going to have to do everything possible to let people know what's coming and
Hmm.
how we can fight back against it. And if flipping seats like Mike Lawler's, the number one seat we have to flip to get back the House majority, by the way,
Yeah.
because they're not running on the hard parts. The good stuff's going to come out now.
Yeah. And so
And
can you,
yeah,
yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more, particularly on like the healthcare provisions of the bill and what people can expect. From my vantage point, it's like an explosive going off. Like it's going to impact individuals first.
yes,
But then when those folks lose access to healthcare, and by the way, like it's not, I've been hearing a lot about we shouldn't be giving people Medicaid. Medicaid is not a check that you get. Medicaid covers costs for you were sick, you want to go back to work or you want to take care of your kids, but you need to go to the doctor to get better.
right.
And then Medicaid reimburses the healthcare providers.
Yeah,
And so the individual loses coverage, which impacts families. The
absolutely.
hospital and the health system loses funding, which impacts all of us, because then that
Right.
hospital or health system needs to make a determination, depending upon the market, of whether it can increase costs for everyone else to maintain what it's presently doing, or
Mm,
cut costs.
right.
And they're so worried about that they developed this rural hospital slush fund, which is going to cover approximately, by our estimates, around 40% of the need, and that's not even going to touch a lot of the hospitals that we have here in the district, and which Mike Lawler previously advocated for more Medicaid funding for, by the way.
Yeah.
And then from there, when those hospitals cut services and staff, it impacts our local economies and our unemployment. Talk to me about healthcare and its importance.
Yeah, well, I want to just caveat up front that Mike Lawler voted for the Medicaid cuts. And then when it went over to the Senate, he wrote a letter saying, please don't cut Medicaid. Like, I just voted to cut it.
I call it the oopsie letter.
Right.
Yeah.
And he did it with energy costs as well. And then it came back with more cuts, and he voted for it again.
Yeah.
Like, there's no moral compass.
This is worse for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do we get there? And so that's the big challenge. So look, as you mentioned in the opening, as a cancer survivor, I was lucky enough when I had cancer to have good healthcare. And healthcare should not be a determination of whether or not you can have the treatment you need to live and survive. But when I go back for my checkups to Sloan Kettering every year, that bill before my insurance is over $2,000 for a checkup one day. When you start taking away Medicaid from folks who need it in the district, about 32,000 people in the district could stand to lose their coverage. That is going to be catastrophic, not just to the people, but to the hospital systems. Even a hospital system like Montefiore, that while they get a version of a reimbursement because Medicaid rates are a little bit different than private insurance, they need that in order to be able to function and operate and have the staffing and the levels they need that we've been seeing obviously dwindle since COVID. And so we'll be seeing emergency rooms that are now preventative care and emergency care truly because people put off getting checked. We're looking at the costs of even like the Affordable Care Act. When I was looking after leaving the FBI for potential insurance, over $2,000 a month for a non-catastrophic plan for a family of three. Now that's going to go up by about $3,000 a year, over $250 a month on top of that rate. And so I think that the big thing we need to think about when it comes to Medicaid is I've had family members in my life, aunts and uncles who were on Medicaid who relied upon it to get their prescriptions as well as to go to the doctor and get treated for serious illnesses. Everyone's going to know someone who is being impacted by this, even if they aren't being impacted themselves. But we are going to all be impacted as the insurance premiums go up by 30-something% here in New York 17. And as hospitals, to your point, start to close. Look at Garnett. I know it's outside the district, but it's here in the Hudson Valley. They've already gone down from a level 1 trauma center to a level 3, and layoffs have begun. That's no coincidence. And as we start to have, I was outside of Mike Lawler's office before the final vote on the bill, protesting with folks, including the SEIU 1199 and healthcare workers who were there, who got up and spoke about the stories about their patients who they weren't going to be able to treat anymore. These were people who were visibly upset with tears in their eyes saying, I want to be able to provide the care, but I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to be able to see that patient. They won't be able to come in anymore. That's what's actually happening. It's a human thing. We can quote the stats to your point earlier, all we want, but it's those personal stories as we start to see folks like myself, if I were on Medicaid, not being able to get treated, or anyone in our families. And then the healthcare providers not being able to, one, keep their jobs. It's slated that up to 3,000 healthcare jobs in New York 17 could be lost from this, but then also not be able to treat people. The whole idea is to do no harm and to treat folks, and they will treat them at the emergency room. But you and I both know that didn't work, and that's why Obamacare was such an important bill. It brought over 20 million people into the healthcare world, and now this bill takes 17 million of them out of it, and it's absolutely disgusting, and it's ridiculous. And that's a lot of what I've been hearing too as this bill has been moving forward, just from those providers who are just feeling so deflated because they want to do the work, they want to help people, and people can't get that help.
And I think that right now, I think that the deflation term kind of sticks with me because I think a lot of people are feeling that.
Yeah.
And I'll put out there, I think it's okay for folks to kind of feel that for a minute.
Yeah.
what should we be thinking about doing next? Where do we go from here? Like, what would your words be to folks who are watching this interview and how they can actually help make the change that they really want to see?
Yeah. To your point, it's exhausting. The
Hmm.
last 10 years have been
Yeah.
exhausting, but we can't give up. This
Hmm.
is the final push as we go towards the next election. And just because the bill has been passed doesn't mean we stop telling the stories of the impact of that passage. And
Hmm.
it's something that I'll be doing here in the campaign. And I urge anyone who's listening or who watches this video later to please reach out to me because I want to hear their stories. I want to talk with them and interview them and understand how their lives have been impacted and the scare that and how scared they are and the frustration they feel.
Yeah.
But we can't stop reaching out. We can't stop going out to those protests, getting with our local groups and standing outside the office. I will tell you, it was such a rewarding experience outside of his office in Rockland because while we're out there with our signs, the number of people who honked was way more than I thought it would be. And in Rockland County, that's pretty
Yeah.
shocking. And so we're
Yeah.
starting to see everyone really wake up
Hmm.
and say, wait a minute. Mike Lawler was benefited by the first 2 years of his first term by Joe Biden being president.
Hmm.
There wasn't a lot that could go through.
Hmm.
And now he has a record to run on, not just
Hmm.
ideas he would have put forward. And people are starting to feel it now. And to your point about the town halls and what
Hmm.
we're seeing there, it's huge. So
Hmm.
I would tell people be active.
Hmm.
Reach out to folks like you and like me.
Hmm.
Share your stories. Reach out if you want to have a conversation on the record with me and do a Zoom like this where we can talk about the impacts because we have to make Mike Lawler and our community know it in case
Hmm.
they don't know someone who's been impacted. And then I think the other thing is we have to call Mike Lawler's office. He
Hmm.
gets a call from me pretty regularly. We've got to write and call and let him know that this is not acceptable. And telling those personal stories are key. So if you don't know someone who's been impacted or may be impacted, reach out to your local community, talk with those folks. And then we need to, you, I, and the other candidates in this race need to keep broadcasting those stories in whatever way we can, with whatever platform we have, because it's really, really important. And we have to make sure that this is not just a facts and figures kind of legislation, but it's a true story of how
Hmm.
people's lives are being shattered.
John Sullivan for Congress. If people want to get involved, how can they reach out to you? Where are you going from here?
Yeah,
What's
yeah. So
next?
you see the website at the bottom there.
Yep.
You can reach out to me at johnsullivan4ny.com. My team and I will monitor that box and we'll do everything possible to reach out. In particular, if you really want to talk about your healthcare journey and the challenges you're facing, let us know. We want to do everything we can to help. This race continues. We have got a long way until the election, but it's being everywhere all at once. And so it's traveling around, talking with folks, and listening. I would just like to say really quickly, I'm running on three things, and it's
Yeah.
affordability, accountability, and safety. We need to run for something, not just against something as Democrats. And presenting that vision going forward is really important, but it's also really important to listen and talk to our community because without their input, none of this matters. We have to hear what is at the forefront of their minds and make sure that we can speak to those issues as we continue through this race. So I look forward to seeing folks in coffee shops and around town and at different forums and walking down the street and doing everything possible to get it out, get the word out there about this campaign. And would love to talk with folks if they want to talk more or just learn or talk more about the healthcare journey with John at johnsullivan4newyork.com.
John, I said this before we started. I just want to thank you again sincerely. And a reminder for everyone who joins this race is making a commitment with a significant opportunity cost. You're a husband and a father, and you have like a full life. And the hours that are put in here on behalf of trying to make a better world for all of us are significant. And I just want to recognize that and say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Kevin. And thank you to our spouses for letting us do this.
Amen.
Yeah.
God bless. I'll talk to you soon, John.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
So we just heard from John Sullivan. Again, I am so thrilled that he was able to join us today. Again, John at johnsullivan4ny.com. He's increasingly all around the district. I'd encourage you to meet him in person. Incredibly knowledgeable both on domestic and foreign policy issues. Again, I will put in a plug. I feel incredibly privileged. John was our final candidate who we had the opportunity to speak with through our first interview series. This is supposed to be the end of it, folks. But because of you and because of some of the candidates, we're going to do it again. And we're going to do it hopefully even better. End of July, August, late summer season, we're going to talk with each of the candidates and actually start to see what issues really drive them, what they think we should be aware of, and how they would better represent us in Congress than Representative Mike Lawler. Peter Chatsky, Kate Conley, Beth Davidson, Mike Sachs, Effie Phillips Staley, John Sullivan, Jeremy Saland, if he jumps into the race, and Jessica Reinman. All incredible candidates. We are spoiled with the folks who are running right now, and I'm looking forward to talking to each of them and making sure that you have a choice in this people's primary come next June. Our first candidate up will be on Saturday, July 31st. It won't be at 6 p.m. That's wrong, because we're just making things up as we go along here. It'll be at 10 a.m. on Saturday. On July 31st with Peter Chatsky, who is going to be talking about affordability. And I'm really looking forward to digging into that topic with him. Again, thank you all for watching, for sharing, for commenting, and for participating. This is how change happens. And I'm so privileged to be able to interview these candidates on your behalf. Talk soon.